Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. So this webinar, the Pulse Check series webinar, Ready for Excellence, Sites Under Short Timelines. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rashid, and I will be your host today, guiding you through this discussion we are delighted to have with you. So today we are excited to have from Task Clinical Research Academy and Care Access. Throughout this session, we will explore the persistent challenges sites face when operating under compressed timelines. We will share with you practical, actionable strategies to help you achieve true operational excellence. So here's a quick overview at what we will be covering today. After the introductions, we will discuss site readiness timelines. Then we will explore searching for the green light, when theory meets practice, and followed by practical tips for sites. And finally, we will have a dedicated Q&A segment. And as we go through the discussion today, feel free to share in the chat what gaps or challenges do you often discover once patient enrollment begins. And we will have our experts address them during the Q&A segment. Simply use the Q&A chat box on the bottom of your screen that you should see, and feel free just to share all your input and feedbacks and challenges that your site encounter. Yeah. For those who may be new to Study Team, let me give you just a high-level overview. More than 12,000 sites in more than 100 countries worldwide are currently using Study Team. Study Team is a cloud-based management tool, can be used as a single database to track and manage patients. Study Team for sites is completely free for sites to use. Sites can use Study Team across as many trials as they would like. And through our work with clinical research sites around the globe, we got valued insights into their workflow and challenges, but also the best practices and lessons learned throughout our relationship with our sites. And this is the reason we are thrilled today to be partnered with Task Clinical Research and Academy and Care Access to share with you some of those insights. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our featured speakers, both leaders who bring deep experience in quality assurance, site readiness, and community engagement. Karen Clotet, Head of Quality Assurance at Task Clinical Research and also Director of Task Research Academy based in South Africa. And then we have Glenn Schatz, VP of Community Engagement at Care Access based in US. Hi, Karen. Hi, Glenn. Thank you so much for being.
Hello.
Thank you for being here with us today. We're very excited to learn from you. And in that context, Karen, I will just hand it over to you, okay?
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. We're really looking forward to actually hearing all the sites' perspectives as well. So introducing Task as a clinical research site and Task Research Academy as the sister company who is very dedicated to clinical research training. Task started in 2005, actually just as a clinical research site, and we were very specialized in the early phases of TB clinical trials. But since then, 17 years later, now in 2025, we are also a site management organization with multiple sites internationally. We have a site in the Netherlands. We have multiple sites here down in South Africa, in Cape Town and George, and also reaching out now to opening sites in the USA. We do any phase of clinical trials, but as I say, we also help organizations, maybe small biotech companies that wants to run clinical trials for the first time, or a smaller commercial group that wants to run clinical trials. We can help them with managing the trial. We do from protocol development submissions, help with site setup, as we will discuss today, the green light activation. And then we can also help with continuous communication to regulatory authorities. We write monitoring plans, we oversee CRAs, we can create ECRFs, data analysis, statistical analysis. So we have the full spectrum of support there. And then from this, I really felt the need that we're sitting on so much knowledge and examples, day-to-day examples of running trials and what's go wrong and what do we learn from it, that I decided to start the company, Task Research Academy, where we have professional learning designers. And my dream is that this must be a different kind of training. This must be simulation training where you can actually implement your knowledge and learn through examples and scenarios and branching scenarios and make your mistakes in the training and learn before you actually have to do it in practice. So if you visit our website, you will see that we're currently running lots of specials on compliance training and competency training and sample management, data governance, and we are also working now on our first startup career pathway. So that's very coincidental that we're talking about startup today, as that is the next chapter that we will be launching in 2026. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for sharing your dedication to innovating trials and trainings. Glenn, could you tell us about Care Access and the community-driven model?
Sure. So Care Access is a global medical research company. In addition to a global site network, we also offer a number of different services to sites and sponsors. One of the main programs that I work on is called the Future of Medicine. And what it is it offers people to participate in research independently of any particular research study. What we've discovered is that a lot of the hesitation for participating in trials is not due to a lack of willingness, but a lack of knowledge. And the Future Medicine allows people to get involved in research in a very low pressure way that also gives something back to them. And so under the Future Medicine, people can come in and get a health check on heart health, brain health, kidney health, liver health. We offer lots of different types of testing options. They'll get the results of their tests back, as well as anyone who has elevated results has access to our medical providers to answer questions about those results. And then what we will do is, after the initial education, when they do their screening tests about research, they'll be contacted by our central teams if they qualify for studies. And so we partner with sponsors and non-Care Access sites to be able to refer highly motivated and engaged participants to research studies. And this program has over 250,000 people enrolled in it, and we're growing every month. And it's something that allows us to be a service provider to the communities that we work in, as opposed to just asking them to participate in trials, which sometimes can feel like a one-way transaction.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, for the Care Access overview. Well, now what I would suggest is let's begin our discussion on site readiness timelines. Karen, from your experience, can you share an example of the challenging timelines sites often face during submission preparation?
Yes, that's actually a good question, because I think that whenever you do clinical trials and if you do work in this space of startup, I think that people will agree with me that startup timeline and having a calm setup, that is the exception. I think a startup to submission is always under huge amount of pressure, and maybe we need to go and see why there is so much pressure and why is it always under a tight timeline. So lots of people, when you are at a site, you are not exposed to this stage of a clinical trial. because you are mostly getting the protocol when it's approved. So that is where your journey will start with a clinical trial. Sorry, I just want to go back to the one slide. It's going forward. But there's actually a lot that is happening in the background for you as a site to be able to get your final approved protocol to start the trial. And that is where we are going to look at today. So normally if you work in startup, maybe you are working at a CRO with, in a startup section of their company, or for the sponsor, which is sometimes responsible for the regulatory submissions, where the sites may be responsible for ethics submissions, or you are at a site where you are responsible on behalf of the PI to submit the protocol. Usually the regulatory authority will have some kind of checklist that you at least have a guide of what is it that I need to prepare for the submission. So for SAPRA, like here in South Africa, you can go to the website and there is a form which you can download that help you with a checklist to see exactly what it is, what you need. Some general documents that is usually required is, of course, number one, the first and final draft of your protocol and the final version of your informed consent that needs to adhere to all that guidelines that GCP gives us on what needs to be in an informed consent form. So that's kind of your checklist of how your informed consent needs to be set up. Then in the background, you also need to have more or less a final budget, because the authorities wants to see that there is indeed enough funding to do this trial for them to be able to approve it. And then your participant insurance, your clinical trial insurance must already be in place when you submit, so that they can see that your participants will be taken care of should there something happen to them in a clinical trial. And then already they want to see what central labs you are going to use, and are these labs accredited? Will they provide good data with integrity? So that is not something you can leave until the end. That's already something you need to have ready for submission. You have to also put forward who's going to be your regional CRA or monitor on the trial. And then that is not even the site documentation. Everybody that's going to work on a clinical trial, at least your investigators, but in South Africa, we submit the investigators, the study coordinators, the pharmacists. So all of them have to sign their CV so that they can prove that they are qualified for their role that they are going to be approved for. They want to see their GCP certification. They want to see their registration as a medical officer. So there's a lot that needs to be ready for submission. And then putting the pressure now on is the timeline, because every regulatory authority and ethics committee just have certain dates where they can actually review your protocol or your submission. In South Africa, we only have 9 opportunities in a year to do a submission. So especially here towards the end of the year, which is October, that's our last time to submit. So everybody rush for this submission date, and that is where the pressure comes in. So to answer your question on an example of what can go wrong in this period, is that there can be real consequences if you rush into a submission. We had an example where we literally requested the protocol, and we got the protocol a week before our submission date. And we had to get all of these records ready for submission and then send it to the authority. So we didn't have time to quality check the protocol. We didn't have time to quality check the informed consent. It went through, it was approved. We had the SIV. And when we started to enroll, we realized that in the informed consent, there was actually a whole paragraph missing on one of the treatment arms. So then you have to sit with this ethical dilemma. Can we go forward? Can we continue screening? Must we halt screening now, amend the informed consent, resend it, get reapproval, or do we continue on this version of the informed consent, inform the participants of the missing section, document that, continue with this study until we get the approved new version? Then we have to reconsent all of these participants now again on this new version. So that set us about a month of halting and figuring out what we need to do. So it's really, it can be a very hard lesson if you rush into your time, into your submission, and not take the time to rather maybe wait for the next submission date, but ensure that you have a high quality submission. Because either you missing a document, then you're not going to get approval, or one of your records is not optimal. And that can then, at the end of the day, really put you, be more of a setback than being able to continue with your trial. Yeah, so that's that on the submission part.
And then one thing that I'll add specific to recruiting with this, that early part of the process is that, as Karen mentioned, sometimes we don't have the protocol early enough, or the informed consent early enough, and in both cases, both the informed consent and the protocol can have a significant impact on recruiting and the pool of folks that we might get to participate in the study. And so, we know there's only so much you can do to push a sponsor to share that information, but it's hard to predict, how quickly you're going to enroll, what your enrollment numbers are going to be if you don't even know the inclusion exclusion, or the inclusion exclusion is too high level. And then when you're working with more challenging populations, sometimes there are terms within the informed consent that can be problematic. And if you start too late, the chance of getting a turnaround and feedback on that is very low. And so this adds extra pressure to the site, who is promising enrollment goals, but also not necessarily knowing what the criteria are before the study starts. So important to push as much as possible, even if it feels like it's rude or asking too much, because it does have a material impact on your ability to enroll the study.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Karen, for sharing.
Sorry, I just want to say the slides are automatically moving. I don't know what's happening.
Maybe she can take back maybe the slide. That's fine. Well, what I suggested, let's stay on the same topic and discuss
Okay.
the green light then. What does the site ready status actually mean in the clinical research world? Is it really just or solely about documentation only, or does it really reflect real-world readiness into start enrolling patients? I mean,
That's also, I think, a little bit of a misunderstood conception that if you have the green light, you are ready. So the green light is actually still a very heavy paperwork milestone and not necessarily a participant milestone. So submission is that almost like when you think of an athlete, you are in your ready position. So everything is just submitted. Now in your green light, you are at the set position. So you in this time, it's also a checklist. So now we're asking ourselves, do we have approval? Do we have our systems? Are we operationally ready? And then only you go into the go mode of first participant in. So if we look at what does the green light mean, I'm sorry, I really don't know what's happening. I'm not moving the slides. What does the green light mean is that there's a lot happening behind the scenes still in this stage. So there's a lot of contracts and budgets that are still need to be negotiated and signed. Service providers needs to be selected and contracted. So let's look at from the site's perspective. Here is the question that the site needs to ask themselves: are we operationally ready to enroll our first participant? Are we ready for day one? So the site will need to ask, people and training wise, are my staff approved? Are we trained? And these days, it's not just training on the protocol. There's a lot of system training that needs to happen because trials has evolved to be very electronically. So there's maybe a despite your ECRF system, there's an e-consent system, an e-diary system, maybe other clinical trial management system. Everybody needs to be trained and access controlled. You have to have GCP, your lab manuals. There's a lot of training happening in the background before you are ready. A lot of documents set up. Your manuals must be ready. Your site files must be ready. Some sponsors now want the delegation log to be completed, not authorized by the principal investigator, but they want to see who's going to work on the study. So that needs to be done. Maybe you have FDA 1572 that needs to be signed and completed. Your SOPs must be ready. And very importantly, when you do create templates, you must align that with your protocol. So your source templates must be created. Your facilities must be ready. Your kits must have arrived. Your equipment must be calibrated. You must ensure that you have a manual temperature system, a backup central temperature system. Your stock must be ready on your emergency trolley. If you have to have translations of your informed consent, this will need to happen now. And then your recruitment plan, as Glenn mentioned. So hopefully you have the protocol and you have been thinking about where you're going to get this population. What is your action plan? What's your enrollment rate? Where are you going to get them? How many are going to screen? How many do you think is going to screen fail to get that first enrollment? So that's from the site's perspective. But even from the sponsor's perspective, there's a lot to be ready to tick this green light boxes. So from the sponsor's perspective, they need to ensure tick box regulatory approval, tick box ethics approval. They have to build all the ECRF systems and data systems that they need, the pharmacovigilance oversight systems for safety. Maybe there need to be a data safety monitoring board that needs to be ready. Contract with service providers, central labs, local labs needs to be set up. Your IP needs to reach the site, or the device needs to reach the site. All your lab kits needs to reach the site. So all that service level agreements with service providers needs to be signed. So there's really a lot that needs to be ready. So trying to get to the green light means that all of these things are now ticked. So again, a very document heavy, system heavy stage that before you actually have the go to start the trial.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Garrett, for this overview. And I like the analogy you put on the slide that green light gets you to the start light, not to cross it. So that was that was a nice one. Well, let's extend the discussion with SIVs and onboarding. How effective are SIV in fully preparing a site for the recruitment process? And what common oversights do sites often discover only once recruitment begins? Any practical, again, steps you can share with us and with the sites that are watching?
Yeah, sure. I think from my side, I have experienced a site initiation visit that was extremely helpful and operationally beneficial. So it can either be your launch pad, where you really feel that you know exactly what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, or it can be an immense lost opportunity. It is depending on how that site initiation visit, is it a very theoretical driven exercise where it's a PowerPoint slide where they copy and pasted the protocol onto a PowerPoint slide and they read the inclusion and they read the exclusion and you just read through all the visits? Or is it a session where you turn it into operational readiness? And for that to be a success, your sites need to have the protocol before the SIV, and the sites have a responsibility to ensure that they actually come prepared to the investigator, to the site initiation visit. So you mustn't sit in the site initiation visit and hear the protocol for the first time. You must come prepared with your questions already where you see a risk. Maybe there's a visit that is highly full of procedures and timelines, and you must be dosing 30 minutes after a protein meal. Then you have 3 triplicate ECGs, 5 minutes apart. Then there must be a 30-minute resting period. Then you need to get your investigational product. Then there must be AEs 10 minutes later. So it can be very heavily time-driven. PKs that needs to be done at a certain time point. Is there windows in the protocol? Maybe that was omitted. So you have to come prepared to the SIV to ask those questions. And the CRA and the sponsor or whoever is driving this investigator meeting or site initiation visit must really focus on practical implementation. So let's take that critical visit. Or maybe there is a crossover study design where we are switching the arms from group A to group B. That's going to be a challenge. What are we going to do? How are we going to highlight that visit? How are we going to prevent a dosing error and ensure that everybody cross over to the right arm? So studies are becoming extremely complex. 10 years ago, we had a study where it's one arm and a standard of care, and you dose in the morning. That's it. Now we have studies where it's crossover design. We have multiple arms, multiple steps that's going to happen, and lots of pharmacokinetics that's going right through the night, pre-analytical procedures that needs to be done by the site. So you need to see, do we have that equipment? Do the site have that experience doing this procedure? So really take that time and opportunity of the site initiation visit and rather have the difficult discussions there than sitting and saying, let's read the protocol, let's all understand it. This is just a tick box exercise that we tick the SIV because the SIV is part of the green light. So we want to get this tick box so that we can go. But are we really ready? So that is what we need to do for the SIV. A lot of things that I've seen when we missed the opportunity in a site initiation visit is, as I explained now, that suddenly we come across this extremely complex schedule. So in paper, it looks easy. There's ECG, there's vital signs, there's PK, there's dosing, say much of the muchness. And then when you start to execute it, you see that these visits fall on a weekend, or you see that it falls on a public holiday. Or if you screen 4 participants the same day and enroll them on the same day, then suddenly the PKs collide and you have to have 4 night staff. So you need to think of these things before the time. So that can be a complex in visits, or there's conflicting instructions. When you look at the fine print under the schedule of events, the schedule of events maybe have vital signs, and it says to you it must be height and weight. But in the fine print, they also want respiratory rate. So there can be contradicting information in the protocol. On the one page, it's this, on the other page, it says that. So that can also be figured out in a site initiation visit. Informed consent issues. We've had issues where we open the informed consent and there's no space for the witness to sign. Or there is, like I said, a missing arm descriptions. There's no place for the principal investigator's signature. And this can, when you also then actually come into doing, if the SIV wasn't very practical, you can see that you don't have enough resources for this trial. I think most of the sites run more than one study at a time. So you might have another study running and you thought just adding this one study would not be, so hard on your resources until you see the complexity of the visit. Then suddenly you don't have enough staff, or you don't have that type of equipment. So all of these things, if you really use your site initiation visit, can help the site not to go into this crisis mode, because that is then where your major protocol deviations actually occur. So my advice to sites and to sponsors is, if you just have an opportunity to just take one day after the site initiation visit and have a dry run. Some sites went as far as a wet run, and a wet run is where you actually take a sample, but not obviously from a participant, but use your colleagues to really see how long does it take. How long does it take for us to collect these samples? So a dry run is where you don't, where you just work through the process. And you literally take it from screening and you say to yourself, okay, informed consent is more or less an hour, and then we move on, and then we have the screening. There must be a physical examination, so we're going to need a doctor here. And then there's vital, so a nurse must come in, and then they must go to the ECG room. Maybe they must go for an X-ray off site. So how are we going to do that? Are we going to drive them there? Are we going to bring the vendor in? So you really work through the visit, and you get to a spot where sometimes you see you don't have an answer. How are we going to do this? Suddenly, maybe you have to mix the IP. You mix the IP and you see, oh, there's actually still a lot left at the bottom if we don't mix it well. So you get in this dry run, you get to see things, and luckily you don't have a participant. So if something goes wrong, you can put a preventative measure in place before that first participant comes to your site. So I really recommend a dry run. If you just take a day and not screen directly after SIV, and just do this and see if your source template works. Is your flow actually logical? That can save you a lot of deviations. So it's that trade-off. So do we prioritize speed, or do we ensure a thorough preparation? Do we pause or do we rush? And normally there is a huge amount of pressure to first participant in. When will be your first participant in? But I believe that if you just take that one day, max 2-3 days, to test the system, test your equipment, your processes, that at the end you will have less deviations, a better flow, better data, better quality. So in short, prepare not to have to repair. And some other practical steps, we have discussed the dry run. Ensure your staff is really prepared. I see training being a tick box exercise. Just do it. Read your SOPs, do this ECRF training, tick, 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 tick. This is the green light risk stage where you just want to get things done. And you don't read properly. You don't go through the manuals. You don't see that the manual is contradicting what the protocol is saying. So align your documents. Look at your equipment, look at your logistics. How long does it take for the lab to turn around to give you your results? The recruitment operations. Is recruitment actually struggling? Why are we struggling? What happened? Talk to your sponsor, have a collaboration meeting. Just use this day to effectively plan, communicate areas where you do have concern, to see if that can actually help you going forward. And the last advice is to then start slow. Don't screen 10 participants for the first round. Start with about 3 to hopefully enroll 1. Just to go through that process with a participant and see that everything is functioning, and then you can hit the ground running with the rest of your enrollment. So that's a wrap from me, just to say that this whole ready, set, go process, this is the whole startup process, which is broken up into your submission, where we have a lot of stressful timelines, rushing for submission, where we can have quality issues that can prevent then that the study needs to pause at some point. At your setting stage, that is your very important stage where you as a site need to be operationally ready to run this trial, where we then go into your SIV, your site initiation visit, that you need to make it practical and not just theoretical, and hopefully have an opportunity for a dry run to identify the gaps, identify where red flags can be, to start your trial.
And just to add a little bit, I agree with everything that Karen says here, but I always try to view my role as being the voice of the participant in trials, because most of my team is participant facing, and so they hear feedback. And one of the things that we hear most frequently is, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's happening. I don't know the schedule. And, all I know is you call me, I come in for a visit. I don't know how long it's going to take necessarily or what you're going to do. And it's impossible to be able to communicate that well to the participants if you don't actually know it yourself. And so a lot of this, it's not enough just to do all the work and the simulations. Like you do need to do all those things because if you don't do those things, you can't communicate that to the participants, both on what the initial visits will look like as well as the visits over the course of the study. You need to be able to answer their questions. If it's a monthly visit, what happens if the visit is on a holiday, or what, how tight are the windows? And so these are all questions that if you put on the hat of the participant, you would want to know. And so I'd encourage you as you're doing this to always put yourself in the shoes of the participant as well, because that will help you generate the set of questions that you might ask the CRA or the sponsor as you're preparing for your SIV as well, just through a different context. And then also once you learn that information, make sure you're sharing it also, because it's not enough just for the site to know it, but the participant needs to know this information as well.
That's very valuable. Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Glenn, for all those valuable insights. And I just wanted to remind the audience that if you have any questions that come through your mind for Karen or Glenn, feel free just to put them on the chat right there. It's a Q&A. It's called Q&A chat box. You can just go ahead and put all your questions there, and we will address them at the end of the segment. Well, that brings us to patient diversity. So we often hear from sites about challenges and difficulties reaching underrepresented patients. And Glenn, we have a question for you on what strategies has Care Access employed to support diverse patient recruitment? And do you have any best practices to share with our audience regarding community engagement?
Sure, happy to talk about this. I will step back to what I mentioned earlier in the webinar about the Future Medicine program. This was a program we specifically started to address these types of issues because, again, a lot of the communities that we're trying to recruit for studies in don't have as much experience with clinical trials. And I think that there's sometimes a misconception that they don't want to participate because they haven't before. But typically, that's not the issue. The issue is more that they want to know what they're getting involved in, just like anyone else would. And and so sometimes it takes a little bit more time. And usually when you're at the SIV, the next thing you have in your mind is FPI and then hitting your enrollment targets, right? So you don't necessarily at that point, it's already too late if you're interested in recruiting diverse set of participants in the study. And so what we encourage our teams to do is to have an ongoing and continuous relationship with the communities that they work in. And I know that's very hard, especially if your site doesn't have a dedicated recruiting team or people that are dedicated to that, because in order to do this work, you actually have to be out in the community and you have to take time away from the site. And when site schedules are full of study visits, it's sometimes hard to figure out where the balance is. But what I would say is if you're not investing in building those relationships well in advance of any particular trial, by the time you get to the trial, it's going to be too late. There are some ways to mitigate that through through digital marketing and recruitment services, but none of that is as sustainable as developing true healthy and trusted relationships with the communities. And there are lots of ways to do that. The most important thing, though, is no matter which way you choose, you're consistent and you keep coming. It's not enough just to host, an education session, once a quarter or a couple times a year, with your database of participants that have participated already, or signed up through digital sources. You need to be going to local health fairs and doing tables there and really going to where people are. And if you're really sophisticated, you might do things like member advisory groups or patient advisory groups, where you're getting feedback from the community on what their needs are, taking that feedback and going to sponsors, saying, hey, this community has a high prevalence of heart disease. They're really interested in these sort of studies, and I know we can recruit well here because they're asking for studies in this therapeutic area. And so the number one thing that I would say here is it it almost doesn't matter what mechanism you use to do this. What matters is that you do it early and often, and you keep doing it and keep going back, even when it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. Because depending on the community, it might take some time to develop the relationships where not only are you communicating the right message about what research is and isn't, and you've kind of made it through all the challenging conversations, but that you're talking to the right people. Sometimes you talk to someone who has a title or a position that would um, indicate they might be influential in a particular community, but maybe it's the wrong person, and maybe you meet the right person 3 months or 6 months into that engagement or those conversations. And so um, when it comes down to it, this all costs time and money, and so you have to balance doing this versus things that you're getting directly paid for. But the investment is well worth it when the time comes to actually enroll the study and you already have a ready and willing pipeline of folks who are excited to participate, not just willing to participate.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. And thank you both for an incredibly valuable and information discussion today. So for everyone watching, here's the contact information for our presenters today. Please feel free to connect with us after the webinar if you have follow-up questions or would like additional resources or support. And before we jump into a Q&A, we would like to hear from you through a quick set of polls. So your feedback will help us understand how to better support you through future webinars maybe, or training or community programs. So those are the polls that are going to show up on the screen. The first poll would you like to receive more information about the Care Access patient recruitment and community engagement initiatives with Care Access? And for our second and third poll, which task support or training areas are most relevant to your current professional needs? I will give everyone a moment to respond. Looks good. The responses are coming through. I'll give another 10 seconds, maybe. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. I think we caught an overview of all these answers. And thank you everyone for your response, and thank you for sharing your feedback on those polls. And we will now move to our final Q&A segment. And please, meanwhile, continue to send your questions in the Q&A chat box, and we will address them. We'll address as many as we can as time allows. Let's look at the chat right now. Let's see if we have some questions. So I'm just going through the chat here, Karen and Glenn. And I can see here Karen, question. So as a CMO, shall I read out to you, Karen? Okay.
Yeah, I can see it. So I don't know. You're welcome to read it. Maybe everybody can't see it.
Okay. I would read out in case others can't see it if you want.
Yes.
Yeah. As a CMO, who help with startups? How do you manage to get vendor accesses for the sites? Oftentimes, the green light is indicative of site personal access to vendors, WRS, elements, EDC, even after SIV. Pressure from sites often faced when we have patients who qualify for a trial and are wanting to screen, but green light is delayed due to missing access to vendors. By the time we actually get green lighted, patient has moved on. Yeah.
I would like to understand this question a little bit more because it's strange that the sponsor is responsible for setting up your vendors. It depends on what the vendor is. Of course, if there is a trial-related procedure, say for instance, there's spirometry in your protocol and your PI or you as staff are not capable to do it, yes, then you as a site will source somebody to do spirometries on your behalf. But something as central as an IVRS system where you do supply management of your investigational product and randomization and a central system such as your CRF, that should come from your sponsor. So I don't know if this is a commercial study or maybe a grant-funded study, but in commercial studies, that's your sponsor responsibility. They set up those vendors on your behalf. So it is, I'm not 100% sure how a study can be set up without a CRF system or without a randomization system. That is a central system that's not the responsibility of the investigator, but the sponsor or CRO needs to get that for you. So in our situation here in South Africa, we will just set up something like the local safety labs. That is not a central activity. So all central activities should be managed by your sponsor or CRO. And a local activity, like for instance, translating your informed consent or your safety lab, or like I said, a certain test like an X-ray, that must be then done by the PI. So I'm not 100% sure if I misunderstood the question, but a central activity must be done by the sponsor and a local activity is for the site. And unfortunately, if you do not have that vendor, but that agreement must be secured before the SIV already. So the sponsor cannot start the trial if those agreements, it's very clear in ICH GCP Revision 3, all agreements must be signed before this trial can start. So that's actually a sponsor responsibility.
Okay. Well, thank you, Karen. I think we could also take this outside the webinar and clarify with the audience on if they would like
Yes, most certainly.
to continue.
So if I didn't answer your question correctly, please reach out. I'm more than happy to answer afterwards.
Great. I have another question here. This one is for Glenn. Are you familiar with Sightline? And if so, what is the difference between Sightline and Care Access? Both use study team.
Sure. I'm going to just assume that Lionel is specifically talking about Sightlines marketing and recruitment services because they do offer other things besides that. But I think those would be the only ones that use Study Team. So Study Team is actually part of Care Access. It's part of One Study Team, which is part of Care Access, and it's a platform that I would say most sites in the world have used for recruitment. And we have folks on the call who can maybe talk more about that as well. And one of the nice things about Study Team is that it can take potential participants from lots of different recruitment services, whether it's Sightline, Care Access, or others, that all can go into one single portal, and then can either be reviewed by the site all as one, right? So they don't have to worry about which recruitment vendor is being used. Or in some cases, Care Access also provides central support to disposition and to reach out to qualified participants and even screen them for studies in some cases, which is a different service that Care Access offers independent of our global site network. So Care Access is, I would say, quite different because we are not necessarily just a digital recruitment vendor. We're offering these screening services through Future Medicine, and so again, I can't speak too much to Sightline, but I know that the folks that we put into sites study team instances are very high intent, are very interested in participating in a study, and we typically also have much more information about them, both from the screenings that we do, where we have the lab results, as well as in many cases we also have medical history, because as part of these screenings we also ask people if they would like to do a medical records release for us and share it with us. So I can't speak for Sightline, but I can speak for what we do at Care Access. And then I don't know if the study team folks want to share anything else about study team to answer this question.
No, I think you managed to explain it very well.
Okay.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you. I have another question, and this one is also from the audience, and that would be around the SIV, Karen. So not sure if you would like to take this one. And this is so our sites utilize the SIV to ask questions about the protocol. Oftentimes, this is the opportunity to use experience from the other trials to ask about scenarios that are not often clear cut and require further clarification from the sponsor or medical monitor. We also ask during SIV if other sites have already been activated and have screened, enrolled, what are the most common issues found, PDs, common AEs, lab issues, etc.
Well, I think this is more maybe a supporting comment than a question.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I just think I do agree that this is the right opportunity, and they're doing it the right way. So it is critical to learn lessons from other sites that have been enrolled and that have started. So 100%, that is the correct opportunity to, when somebody started in front of you, already ask the question. So have you seen any deviations yet? Where did they struggle? So that they can teach you those lessons at your SIV. So that is definitely a wonderful opportunity that they use.
Thank you, Karen. For you, Glenn, we know that building trust with the community, within the community is hard because that trust understandably takes a long time to build. What are some of the longest partnership you've worked on?
Um, so I'll give an example of the longest partnership where it took from the initial outreach to when we actually did an activity with them. It was with a Native American community in the U.S., but I think this is relevant to lots of indigenous communities. And in the U.S. specifically, there are some legal um, and cultural limitations on how you can work with indigenous communities on their tribal land. And so it's almost treated as like a different nation in some ways. And then there's questions about data sovereignty and sample sovereignty. And so it doesn't fit neatly into any of the existing boxes that most protocols will cover. And sponsors really want to work with these communities, but have had challenges in the past before, typically because the study timelines don't match up with the amount of time it takes for these communities to get comfortable with the protocol. And so in the case of the one that I'm discussing now, it was with Oglala Sioux tribe in South Dakota. Our initial visit to them was about 2 years before our first activities with them, and we probably visited a dozen times in that 2 year period, both to do listening sessions, sponsoring activities, outreach to different members of the community who had experience in clinical research, and then engaging locally with a site is made up of predominantly indigenous staff members. And this particular site had been doing observational studies for 30 years, so they were very familiar with research. They very much wanted to do clinical research, but bridging the gap from doing observational research to clinical research and working with academic or government sponsors versus pharma sponsors still took about 2 years, even though it was a very, very mutually positive relationship, just to overcome some of the just differences in how they worked and the working with their local IRB as well and their local research review board and tribal council and just a lot of different steps. But at the end of the day, it was all very much worth it because we've done, I think, half a dozen studies with them now. They are spreading the message to other indigenous communities around the country about how to participate in research, and they have overcome a lot of barriers. So maybe the next time it won't take 2 years; it may take a year, and we'll know all the different steps we need to go through. So that's the one that I'm most proud of, but also did take the longest to do.
Well, thank you, Glenn. For that trust is only with time and patience that trust is built. Thank you. We have Karen, let's see if we have another questions for we have a few questions about community as well. We've got a good one here coming up for a question for both Karen and Glenn. What are some of the biggest structural changes that need to occur in clinical research to enhance access and diversity?
Yes,
I
I
mean,
can.
go ahead, Karen. Yeah.
I think you have more examples. I can just think of one that we had to do most recently because for access and diversity, for me, it means you need to get to the participant. So the participant obviously can't get to you. That blocks them to have access. So your clinical research needs to become mobile. And here in South Africa, and surely I believe it's also across the world and globe, and also more in your geriatric patients, just going digital is not always the answer because that can also be very stressful for them to have to do everything electronically. So that's not always the answer, but getting yourself to the participant home visits, that's more where we are going. And we literally converted a bus into a unit where we can then transport ourselves into a community who doesn't have their own transport. So we go to them. And then obviously this was after we also have a community advisory board. So this was now after a lot of engagement. We don't just rock up with a bus and here we are and we're doing trials. This was after community engagement, outreaches, testing the waters. And the obstacle was we cannot get to you. So we went to them. And then we have this bus and we also gave like Len examples first of a little bit of free screening, like just test your blood pressure with us, just test so that we can just get to know each other. And then we started with the consenting, going to their homes, doing direct observational therapy, using our people to go to them, to give them the medicine, observe them drinking it. So it's a lot of time, but that is how we could give them access to clinical trials.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. I mean, we have a fleet of somewhere between 50 and 100 vehicles to be able to do these sort of things that are set up to be mobile, sites basically that have centrifuges, have phlebotomy chairs, all of that on the vehicles, different sizes, shapes for different purposes. The other thing that unfortunately, and this is way, 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 way before the SIV, but I think the protocol design, a study design is a major part of this. And as Karen alluded to, having decentralized methods that sponsors are comfortable with to
Yeah.
allow going directly to the communities is really important. And if it's not in the study design, I mean, you can't do it, right? So
Yeah.
it's outside of our control. But what we can do as sites is keep asking, keep pushing for these, and keep tying them to enrollment goals. Because ultimately, the sponsors need to enroll the trials, and they need to do it quickly. And for them, doing anything new is it's a risk reward type of thing, because obviously any innovative study design carries with it some risks.
Yeah.
But I think we have a lot of experience from COVID and in the last several years of figuring out ways to bring studies to participants. And then the other thing, which is obvious and I think is pretty common now, but also just worth bringing up, is making sure that folks are compensated for their time, and making sure that that travel is easy for them, whether that be through stipends for travel or providing transit directly for them, if that's an option. And if you don't see that as part of the CTA, you should be having those conversations early, because you won't be able to enroll a lot of people if if you can't get them to the site, or can't go to them.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your thoughtful questions. Unfortunately, we were not able to answer all of them, but we will make sure to respond offline to any question we could not cover today. So a huge thank you to our expert speakers. We will definitely do another one, pulse check series next year. Karen, Clotilde, and Glenn Schatz, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We truly appreciate you spending some time with us today. And we will be sending a follow-up email with a recording shortly. And we can just continue the conversation outside the webinar with Karen and Glenn. On behalf of the entire team, thank you for your time and have a wonderful day, everyone.